There is a voice in your head that speaks to you more than any other voice you will ever hear. It speaks to you before you fall asleep. It speaks to you the moment you wake up. It speaks to you when you fail, when you succeed, when no one is watching, and when everyone is. And here is the strange part. Most people never once stop to ask a simple question. Is this voice helping me, or is it slowly destroying me? Carl Jung, one of the most profound minds in the history of psychology, spent his entire life studying the inner world of human beings. And one of his most haunting discoveries was this: the way you speak to yourself in private becomes the way life speaks to you in public. Your inner dialogue is not just commentary on your life. It is the architecture of your life. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere most people are too afraid to go. Inside your own mind. Because the truth is, you have been at war with yourself for a long time, and you did not even know it. You have been calling yourself weak when you were tired, stupid when you were still learning, broken when you were simply hurting. And every single time you did that, something inside you flinched. Something inside you believed it. But there is another way to talk to yourself. A way that heals instead of wounds. A way that builds instead of tearing down. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how to use it, why it works, and why the voice in your head might be the most powerful tool you have never learned to control. So let me ask you honestly. If a stranger followed you around for one full day and repeated back to you everything you say to yourself in your own mind, would you thank that stranger, or would you never want to see them again? Sit with that question. Because most people, if they are honest, would be ashamed. They would hear a stranger call them lazy for resting, stupid for a single mistake, unworthy for a moment of doubt, and they would realize, perhaps for the first time, that they have been letting a bully live inside their own skull, rent-free. For years, sometimes for their entire lives. But here is the hope hidden inside that discomfort. If you built this voice, one repetition at a time, then you also have the power to rebuild it. Not through denial, not through forced positivity, but through something far more honest and far more powerful. Understanding, let's begin. For most of human history, we believed that suffering came from the outside. Bad luck, bad people, bad circumstances. We blamed the world for how we felt. And to some degree, the world does hurt us. Loss is real. Betrayal is real. Hardship is real. Nobody is denying that life leaves marks. But Carl Jung looked deeper than the surface of pain. He looked at the space between the event and the emotion. He looked at what happens in the silence after something goes wrong, in that private moment before you react. And in that silence he found something remarkable. He found a second voice. Not the voice of the world telling you that you failed. The voice of yourself, telling you what that failure means. You might think those two voices are the same thing. Yet they are not. The world can tell you that you lost your job. But it is your own voice that decides whether that means you are unemployed, or whether it means you are worthless. The world can tell you that a relationship ended, but it is your own voice that decides whether that means the relationship simply ran its course, or whether it means you are impossible to love. Do you see the difference now? The event is neutral. It is your internal narration that gives it a soul, dark or light, cruel or compassionate. Think for a moment about two people who go through the exact same hardship. Two people who lose the same job on the same day for the same reason. One of them goes home and says to himself, "This is a setback, not a verdict on who I am. I will find my way through this." The other goes home and says, "This proves what I always suspected. I am not good enough and I never will be." Same event, same circumstances. Two entirely different lives about to unfold from this point forward. Simply because of what happened in that private, invisible moment of self-talk. This is the part most people never see, because it happens too fast and too quietly for them to notice. The verdict arrives before the thought even feels like a choice. It feels automatic, instinctive, almost involuntary, like breathing. But Jung would remind us that just because something feels automatic does not mean it is unchangeable. It only means it has been repeated so many times that it now runs in the background, unquestioned. And here is where the tragedy begins for so many people. Somewhere along the way, without ever choosing it, they inherited a voice that speaks like an enemy. A voice shaped by a critical parent, a harsh teacher, a painful comparison, a moment of public embarrassment that never fully left them. That voice moved in quietly, uninvited, and made itself at home. And now it speaks first, before anything else has a chance to. You know this voice. You have heard it say things like, "Why do you always mess things up? You will never be good enough. Everyone else has it figured out except you. You should have known better. You are too much, and somehow also not enough." And notice something strange about this voice. It rarely announces itself as an enemy. It disguises itself as realism. It tells you it is simply keeping you grounded, keeping you humble, preparing you for disappointment before life delivers it. It convinces you that without its constant vigilance, you would become arrogant, careless, undisciplined. And because it sounds so reasonable, so protective, you rarely question it. You simply obey it the way you might obey a strict authority, figure you were taught never to argue with. But ask yourself honestly, has this voice ever once made you feel stronger after it spoke? Has it ever left you feeling more capable, more at peace, more ready to try again? Or has it only ever left you smaller, quieter, more hesitant than before? A voice that claims to protect you, yet never once leaves you feeling safe, is not protection at all. It is simply an old wound, speaking in the language of wisdom. Now here is the part that Jung understood so deeply, and the part most people miss entirely. That voice does not feel like an opinion. It feels like a fact. It feels like truth, because it has been repeated so many times, in so many private moments, that it has stopped sounding like a thought and started sounding like your identity. But a thought repeated is not the same as a truth revealed. Let me give you an example. Not a grand, dramatic story, but a simple, human one. Because healing usually begins in simple moments, not in fireworks. Imagine a young woman named Elena, talented, hardworking, kind, but every single time she made a mistake at work, even something small, a typo, a missed deadline by an hour, her mind would erupt into the same sentence. "You always ruin everything." Not "I made a mistake." Not "this is something to learn from." Just "you always ruin everything." Said with total conviction. Said the way you would say the sky is blue. For years, Elena believed this sentence was simply a description of who she was. She thought she was being honest with herself. She thought this harshness was what kept her disciplined, what kept her sharp, what kept her from becoming lazy or careless. But here is what was actually happening underneath the surface. Every time she spoke to herself this way, her body responded as if she was under attack. Her shoulders would tighten, her stomach would knot. Her confidence, the very thing she needed to fix the mistake and move forward, would quietly leave the room. And so, ironically, the voice that claimed to be helping her become better was the very thing making her perform worse. She would sit at her desk, staring at the same email for 20 minutes, paralyzed, not because the task was difficult, but because some part of her had already decided the outcome before she even began. Why try carefully when a part of her was convinced that ruin was inevitable anyway? This is the quiet cruelty of a harsh inner voice. It does not just punish you after the mistake. It begins to sabotage you before you even get the chance to try. Now compare this to another person, a young man named David, who worked in the very same office. David made mistakes too, plenty of them, but when he made an error, his internal voice said something different. Not "you always ruin everything," but that one slipped through, "let's catch it next time." Notice what is missing from that sentence. There is no permanent label, there is no character verdict, there is simply a fact, followed by a forward motion. Over the years, David and Elena were given the same opportunities, the same challenges, the same setbacks, but David's career moved forward steadily, not because he was more talented, but because his mind allowed him to recover quickly and keep trying. Elena's mind, on the other hand, spent so much energy punishing her for the past that there was little energy left to build the future. This is the trap. And it is a trap millions of people are living inside of right now, in this very moment without realizing it. They believe that being hard on themselves is the price of excellence. They believe that self-criticism is what separates the disciplined from the lazy, the driven from the complacent. But Jung would tell you something very different. He would tell you that harsh self-talk is not discipline. It is unprocessed pain, wearing the mask of motivation. And here is the turning point. Here is the contradiction that changes everything, once you truly understand it. You might think that being gentle with yourself means becoming soft, becoming weak, letting yourself off the hook. Yet the opposite is true. Self-compassion is not the absence of standards. It is the foundation that allows you to meet high standards without collapsing under the weight of your own judgment. Think about it like this. If you constantly criticize a plant for not growing fast enough, if you pull at its leaves and tell it that it is failing, it does not grow faster, it withers. But if you give that same plant steady light, patient care, and the right conditions, it grows strong roots, and eventually, it reaches heights that no amount of yelling could have ever forced out of it. You are not so different from that plant. Your mind, your confidence, your motivation, they do not grow through cruelty. They grow through steady, honest, and compassionate attention. So let's talk about how you actually change this. Because understanding the problem is only the beginning. What matters now is transformation. The first principle is this. You must learn to separate the event from the verdict. Something happens. You are late, you forget something important. You say the wrong thing in a meeting, that is the event. It is a fact, plain and simple, but then your mind rushes in with a verdict. You are careless. You are unreliable. You always do this. Here is what Jung's work teaches us, distilled into something you can use today. The event deserves your attention. The verdict deserves your suspicion. The next time something goes wrong, pause before the verdict arrives. Literally pause, take one breath, and ask yourself, what actually happened? In plain, neutral words, without judgment attached? Not I am a failure, but I missed a deadline. Not I always ruin things, but I made an error this time. This might sound small. It might even sound too simple to matter. But this single shift, separating the fact from the harsh interpretation, is often the very first crack of light into a mind that has been living in darkness for years. Let's practice this together right now with a real example. Imagine you forget to call someone back, someone important, and they feel hurt by it. The old voice might rush in and say, "You are careless. You don't value the people who matter. This is exactly why people leave you." Notice how far that sentence has traveled from the original event. It started as a missed phone call. It ended as a verdict on your entire worth as a person capable of love. Now try the separation. The event is this. I forgot to call them back. That is all that actually happened. Everything else, the story about carelessness, about being unworthy of connection, about people leaving, that is interpretation, built on old fears, not on the facts in front of you. When you learn to stop at the event and resist the urge to build an entire courtroom trial out of a single moment, you free up enormous emotional energy. Energy you can now use to actually repair the situation, call the person back, apologize sincerely, and move forward, instead of spending that energy drowning in shame. The second principle is this. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. This idea sounds gentle, almost soft, and because of that, many people dismiss it. They think it is only for people who are fragile or people who need coddling. But consider this seriously for just a moment. If your closest friend came to you after making a mistake, trembling with embarrassment, would you say to them, "You always ruin everything. You are pathetic. You never learn"? Of course not. You would sit with them. You would say, "This is hard, but this does not define you. Let's figure out what to do next." Now ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Why do you deserve less kindness than a friend would receive from you? Why have you decided that you are the one exception in your own life who does not deserve compassion? There is no good answer to that question. There never was. Jung believed that true psychological health comes from what he called integration, bringing together the parts of yourself you have rejected, the parts you are ashamed of, the parts you have hidden even from your own awareness. And you cannot integrate what you are constantly attacking. You cannot heal a wound while you continue to reopen it every day with cruel words. So starting now, I want you to practice something. Not perfectly, not overnight, but consistently. When you catch yourself speaking harshly, stop and ask, would I say this to someone I love? If the answer is no, then you already know it does not belong in your own mind either. There was a father once who spent years coaching his daughter's small football team. He noticed something interesting. When a child on the team missed a shot, he never once yelled at them, never once called them careless or hopeless. Instead, he would kneel down, look them in the eye, and say, "You will get the next one." And almost every time, the child's shoulders would relax. Their eyes would lift, and they would return to the game lighter, freer, more capable than before. One evening, his own daughter missed an important shot in front of a crowd, and afterward, in the car, she began to cry and said quietly, "I'm so stupid. I always mess up when it matters." Without hesitation, he turned to her and said, "Would you ever say that to one of your teammates?" She shook her head immediately. "Then why?" he asked gently. "Do you think you deserve worse treatment than they do?" She had no answer, because there is no answer. There never is. The people we love most receive our patience, our understanding, our belief in their potential, even after failure. And yet somehow we reserve our harshest words for the one person who is with us in every single moment of our lives, ourselves. The third principle, and this one is deeply important, is this: your inner voice is not fixed. It was learned, and what was learned can be relearned. Many people believe their harsh inner critic is simply who they are. They say things like, "I've always been hard on myself, that's just my personality." But personality is not destiny. Much of what feels like personality is actually pattern, repeated so many times that it feels permanent. Think about how a child learns language. A child is not born speaking a specific language. They learn it by hearing it repeated, over and over, until it becomes automatic, until it feels like the only way to think. Your inner critical voice was learned the very same way. Perhaps from a parent who meant well, but who criticized more than they encouraged. Perhaps from an environment where mistakes were punished rather than understood. Perhaps from comparison, watching others succeed and quietly concluding that you were less than. But here is the empowering truth hidden inside this realization. If that voice was learned through repetition, then a new voice, a kinder, wiser, more grounded voice, can also be learned through repetition. It will not happen in one day. It did not take one day to build the old voice, and it will not take one day to build the new one. But it is absolutely possible. Consider how strange it is that we accept this truth so easily in every other area of life, yet forget it the moment it applies to our own minds. No one expects to learn a new language in a single afternoon. No one expects to build physical strength after one visit to the gym. We understand instinctively that change takes repetition, patience, and time. Yet when it comes to how we speak to ourselves, we expect instant transformation. And when it does not arrive overnight, we conclude that we are simply broken beyond repair. You are not broken. You are simply early in the process. This is where daily practice matters more than motivation. Motivation fades. Practice remains. Every time you choose a kinder response instead of a cruel one, you are not being naive. You are rewiring decades of conditioning, one moment at a time. Some days the old voice will still win. It has had years of practice, and it will not surrender its position without resistance. But every single time you interrupt it, even briefly, even imperfectly, you weaken its grip just slightly, and you strengthen the new voice just slightly. Over months, These small moments accumulate into something that finally feels like freedom. The fourth principle is this: silence is not always peace, and noise is not always harm. Many people try to escape a harsh inner voice by drowning it out. Endless distraction, constant noise, constant scrolling, constant busyness. They believe that if they never sit in silence, the harsh voice cannot reach them. But Jung's work suggests something far more courageous. He believed that we must turn toward what we fear inside ourselves, not away from it, because whatever you avoid does not disappear, it waits. It grows louder in the quiet moments you cannot always control. Late at night, in moments of stillness, in moments of failure you cannot distract yourself from. So instead of running from the voice, sit with it just for a moment and ask it a simple question. What are you afraid of? You will often find that beneath the harshness is not hatred, it is fear. Fear of failing, fear of being unworthy, fear of being seen as inadequate. The critical voice, as painful as it is, often believes, in its own broken way, that it is protecting you from disappointment by preparing you for the worst. Once you see this, something shifts. You stop seeing the voice as an enemy trying to destroy you, and you start seeing it as a frightened, misguided part of yourself, trying, clumsily, to keep you safe, and you cannot heal what you continue to see only as an enemy. You can only heal what you are willing to understand. There was a woman who, every single night before an important meeting, would lie awake listening to a voice that whispered, "You are going to fail tomorrow. Everyone will see through you. You don't belong in that room." For years she fought this voice, argued with it, tried to shout over it with forced positivity. Nothing worked. The voice only grew louder the harder she resisted it. One night, exhausted from the struggle, she tried something different. Instead of fighting the voice, she asked it, quietly, almost like speaking to a frightened child, "What are you actually afraid of?" And to her surprise, an answer surfaced from somewhere deep within her. The fear was not really about the meeting at all. It was about being exposed, about being seen as unprepared the way she once was, humiliated many years earlier, as a child standing in front of a classroom. The harsh voice was not trying to destroy her. It was trying, in its own broken way, to protect a wound that had never fully closed. Once she understood this, the voice did not disappear completely, but it softened. It no longer felt like an enemy standing in front of her. It felt like an old, frightened part of herself standing beside her, finally being seen instead of silenced. The fifth and final principle is this: healing is not about silencing the voice completely. It is about changing what the voice says. Some people expect that healing means the inner critic disappears forever, that one day they wake up and there is only peace, only confidence, only light. But that is not how the mind works, and expecting that will only lead to disappointment. The goal is not silence. The goal is a new dialogue. A voice that can say, "This is hard and you are still capable." A voice that can say, "You made a mistake, and mistakes do not erase your worth." A voice that can say, "You are allowed to rest without earning it through suffering." This new voice does not deny difficulty. It does not pretend that life is easy or that you are perfect. It simply refuses to add cruelty on top of hardship that is already heavy enough. There is one more principle worth understanding before we bring everything together, and it may be the most quietly powerful of them all. Healing your inner voice is not a solitary act that happens only in your own mind. It is reflected and reinforced in the way you allow others to speak to you as well. Jung believed that we often recreate in our outer relationships the same dynamics we carry within us. If your inner voice constantly criticizes you, you may find yourself, without realizing it, drawn toward people who criticize you in the same way, because on some level it feels familiar, even if it is painful. And if your inner voice begins to soften, begins to speak with more patience and understanding, you may find that you have less tolerance for those in your life who speak to you the way your old inner critic once did. This is not a coincidence. It is consistency. The voice you use with yourself sets the standard, for the voice you will accept from others. When you start protecting yourself from your own cruelty, you naturally start protecting yourself from the cruelty of others as well. Healing in this way does not stay locked inside your own head. It quietly reshapes the relationships around you, because you begin to expect and to receive the same respect you have finally learned to give yourself. Now, let's bring this back to you. Honestly, think about the last time you made a mistake. What did you say to yourself in that moment? Was it something you would say to a friend, or was it something you would never dare say to anyone else, except the one person you can never escape, yourself? I want you to understand something clearly. Every single day, you are either building yourself up or quietly tearing yourself down, one thought at a time. There is no neutral ground here. Your mind is always speaking, and what it says becomes the emotional soil that your entire life grows from. So here is your challenge, starting today, starting the moment this video ends. The next time you fail at something, however small, pause before you speak to yourself. And instead of reaching for the old familiar cruelty, choose one sentence of honesty mixed with compassion. Not "I am worthless, but this was hard, and I am still here." Not "I always fail, but this time did not go as planned, and that is allowed." This is not weakness. This is not making excuses. This is the beginning of a relationship with yourself that can finally hold both truth and kindness at the same time. And I want you to notice something important here. This change will not always feel comfortable at first. If you have spent years, maybe even decades, believing that harshness is what kept you sharp, kindness will feel foreign, even suspicious, like it cannot possibly be enough to keep you disciplined. But watch closely what actually happens when you try it. You will notice that you recover from setbacks faster. You will notice that you take on challenges you once avoided, simply because failure no longer feels like a life sentence. You will notice that your energy, once spent fighting yourself, is now available for the things that actually matter. This is not a small shift. This is the difference between a life lived in constant self-defense and a life lived in quiet, steady growth. Because here is what Carl Jung understood. Perhaps better than almost anyone in his field, you will spend more time with yourself than with any other person on this earth. Every conversation you have, every relationship you build, every dream you chase, all of it passes through the filter of how you speak to yourself first. If that voice is cruel, the world will always feel heavier than it needs to be. But if that voice becomes honest and kind, even hardship becomes survivable. Even failure becomes a lesson instead of a life sentence. Even your darkest moments become something you can walk through, instead of something that breaks you completely. You are not asking for perfection, you are asking for peace. And peace begins the moment you decide that the voice in your head deserves to sound less like a punishment, and more like a companion who is walking beside you, not against you. So tonight, before you sleep, and tomorrow when you wake, listen closely to that first voice that speaks to you, and ask yourself one final powerful question. If this voice is the one thing you can never escape for the rest of your life, isn't it time you finally taught it how to be kind? That is how you talk to yourself. And that, quietly, patiently, one honest thought at a time, is how you heal.